Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. We'll give folks just another minute and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Energy Futures Initiative workshop, The Potential for Clean Hydrogen in the Carolinas. My name is Alex Kaiser. I'm the Senior Vice President for Research at EFI. We are a DC-based think tank formed by Ernest Moniz, former Secretary of Energy under President Obama. I will help guide today's discussion. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the EFI website and YouTube channel. And each panel discussion will include a Q&A period in which you can submit questions in the chat. There are three main components of today's discussion. First, a fireside chat led by Secretary Moniz with two key leaders in the region on energy, decarbonization, and hydrogen. Second, a panel discussion on existing hydrogen projects in development throughout the world to understand their recipes for success. And finally, a discussion on the ongoing hydrogen activities in the Carolinas region. Without further ado, I'd like to direct your attention to EFI's CEO, Ernest Moniz, to kick things off with a few remarks before the fireside chat. Secretary Moniz?
Okay, well, thank you, Alex, and also thanks to the entire team and, of course, our regional partners, including Duke Energy, on their support for making this discussion possible. Today's discussion, today's workshop will hopefully form a clearer picture of the interests and capabilities in the Carolinas and the surrounding regions to build a market for clean hydrogen. North Carolina and South Carolina, with state GDPs combined totaling about $750 billion, have broad economies anchored by financial services, manufacturing, government enterprises, trade, professional, scientific, and technical services. If it were its own nation, the Carolinas would be the 18th largest economy in the world, greater than quite a few other countries, obviously. The states also complement each other, with North Carolina having a world-class reputation, including in business services and biotechnology, and South Carolina having international recognition in advanced manufacturing, distribution, and logistics. All of these industries could play a major role in supporting a hydrogen hub in the region, with such initiatives including creating, designing, and developing advanced pipeline and storage facilities, integration of hydrogen in the transport sector, production of hydrogen from carbon-free sources like renewables and nuclear, and integration of these activities through its comprehensive intermodal infrastructure. The clean hydrogen is a potential pathway, I think, as we all know, to decarbonize multiple important end-use sectors, including difficult to decarbonize sectors, while addressing some of the biggest challenges to economy-wide decarbonization. It can serve as a long-term storage medium as well, can be produced from an array of resources, and can be used in many existing energy systems. Across Europe, Asia, and parts of the United States, new entrants and existing companies along the entire value chain are simultaneously developing, evaluating, and deploying hydrogen production, transportation, and end use. And today, we'll hear about what's going on and could be promoted in the Carolinas and surrounding regions. Certainly in the United States, a fully functioning market, we think, begins with strategic regional investments to build out hydrogen infrastructure, connecting with existing industrial assets. The Carolinas region has a history in hydrogen R&D, broad industrial capabilities, and an array of potentially amenable existing infrastructure to enable the growth and formation of a hydrogen hub. So this workshop and the subsequent workshop report that we will put together summarizing today's discussion will also inform a larger EFI project examining avenues for hydrogen market formation in the United States. We see tremendous value in this and in the regional approach. So for that, I want to turn to these two outstanding panelists that we have to help kick off this discussion. Lynn Good, the CEO of Duke Energy, we welcome, and we also welcome Vahid Majidi, the director of the Savannah River National Lab. So welcome, and let's just dive right in with a broad first question. You're obviously both situated in the Carolinas, and how do you see Carolinians benefiting from building these local hydrogen markets? And how do you see a regional hub in the Carolinas accelerating decarbonization and regional economic development? Lynn, why don't I kick it off to you first?
Sure. Secretary Moniz and Vahid, it's really a pleasure to be with both of you today. I appreciate the leadership, Secretary Moniz, that you've demonstrated around climate. You recognize there's no single solution. And so to have an opportunity to engage on the topic of hydrogen today, I think is really important, and it's an honor for Duke to be a part of it. As I think about the context of where we are in the Carolinas and Duke Energy in general, we have a goal of achieving at least 50% carbon reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. We have a clear line of sight on how to get to 2030. It's a matter of retiring existing coal assets. It's putting in place more solar and battery and wind, existing technologies. But as we get beyond 2030, into the deeper into the 2030s and begin really tackling that net zero goal, then we begin looking for new technologies. We begin looking for what we would call load following zero carbon technologies. And hydrogen, as you indicated from your opening remarks, Mr. Secretary, is not only versatile for the needs of an electric and gas company, but it has industrial uses, potentially the military, long-haul transportation, a broad number of sectors that are also going after carbon reduction. And I think about the opportunity we have here in this decade with supporting policy coming in place with the infrastructure bill, potentially tax credits as well. We could make real progress on technical feasibility and also on tackling cost competitiveness so that as we get to the 2030s, it becomes a really valuable tool to reach net zero. So I believe the Carolinas represent a great opportunity. The concept of hubs represent a great opportunity. And my hope is conversations like this one get us started with the momentum that we need to make progress.
Great. I just want to add in before, Vahid, we turn it over to you that as you indicated, we are certainly aligned in an all of the above philosophy, number one, and number two, that we need, of course, a decarbonized electricity system, which will include firm power, as you indicated. You called it load following, and we will also need a fuel, and that's where I think hydrogen can supply so many of these fuel services. But Vahid, let's hear your perspective. I should just say that the Savannah River Laboratory has served in so many ways in the nuclear sphere and the national security sphere. And I look forward to your take on this hydrogen market.
Thanks, sir. And for 7 decades, we've been working with hydrogen, except in form of tritium. So hydrogen has been ingrained into the DNA of Savannah River National Laboratory. But if you look at Carolinas, from across the country, from the top 100 institutions publishing on hydrogen, 6 of those institutions are in Carolinas. This is Savannah River National Laboratory, North Carolina State University, University of South Carolina, Clemson, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Duke are amongst the top publishers in hydrogen. Just imagine within Carolinas, if we bring these 6 organizations together, institutions together, along with industry, we can really develop an ecosystem that feeds the growth of hydrogen economy in Carolinas. From the Department of Energy National Laboratory, Savannah River has one of the largest number of researchers in hydrogen. Every day at the laboratory, there is about 300 people that touch some hydrogen isotope somewhere along the process. And we got roughly about 80 hydrogen researchers at the laboratories focusing on various aspects of hydrogen alone. So I think it's really the combination of the academic, the national laboratory research, and what we are really good at from the Department of Energy's perspective is bringing research into large scale production. So again, a partnership with industry is really where I think in Carolinas, we can win and develop a hydrogen economy that benefits us.
Thanks. I'll just note for the for all the listeners that not only does Savannah River work with tritium, hydrogen isotope, but it is the lab in the 17 lab system that does that work. Although I hope this hub will focus more on stable isotopes of hydrogen. To move forward, you've partly answered this, Vahid, in your remarks, but it would be great to get both of your perspectives on what do you see as the assets in the Carolinas more broadly, in fact, for being potentially a lead in the green hydrogen regional hub development, because we certainly believe that it's building on the existing assets, which can allow this to go forward, hopefully at a good pace. Lynn, do you want to again start with that?
I'll jump in. And, I believe your introductory remarks, which painted the picture of who the Carolinas are in terms of our scale and diversity, is a part of that story. I think the comments that Vahid made around world-class institutions in our university system, I would add to it that EPRI is also based in Charlotte. EPRI, along with the Gas Technology Institute, is doing a lot of work around low carbon generation of electricity. I believe they could add to the conversation. And then in the concept of green or pink hydrogen, whichever one you want to describe, Duke brings the largest regulated nuclear fleet in the US, positioned in the Carolinas, as well as a very strong solar resource. North Carolina is somewhere around third or fourth in the US in installed solar capacity. So we do have the opportunity with those resources to add a valuable input into the production of hydrogen. I also think about natural gas infrastructure has become an increasingly important part of the generation of electricity over the last 15 years. We also have a very healthy local distribution operation at Duke. And I believe the opportunity to use that infrastructure in a way that furthers development of use cases for hydrogen could also be helpful to the development of the science and the technical feasibility that we're all hoping to accomplish.
Of course, just to follow up on one point, the newest gas turbines coming out already can handle about 30% hydrogen. Do you see at Duke Energy moving in this direction, trying to kind of build up the hydrogen natural gas mixtures?
Yes, we see that as a key element, not only in achieving our carbon reduction, but doing so in a cost-effective way using existing infrastructure. So we are experimenting, piloting with blending with a CT kind of on the horizon so that we can really learn more about this. And as you said, the OEMs are being active in the development of this technology in a way that I think will also be useful.
Yeah. Vahid, maybe you can elaborate and don't feel reserved in advertising Savannah River's.
No. Actually, North Carolina has been investing in solar, and they're the fourth state in investment as far as the solar energy goes. And South Carolina has consistently been one of the leaders in developing and investing in hydrogen economy. So we had a significant investment in the past. I would say one more advertisement for Savannah River that we do have the DOE's Center of Excellence for Hydrogen Storage that focuses on a number of different areas. But by and large, Carolinas have been the main driver of renewables and hydrogen, and they've made that investment in the past. So I'm obligated to say on behalf of the secretary, I met with her yesterday, and she mentioned that blue and green hydrogen. So we've got to continue pushing those to go to net zero. And that's really the best place for Carolinas. Again, I would continue focusing on research institutions around the Carolina but more importantly, the industrial investment. If you look at BMW, it has the largest fleet of hydrogen-powered forklifts, and they make the SUVs for the entire world. So we know that the industry is interested. If we can bring one of those hubs in Carolinas, it really spurs out a tremendous amount of research as well as the engagement to create that economy of scale to start on decarbonizing. But again, the hydrogen being one of the key sources there.
Hydrogen storage is certainly one of the major infrastructure challenges. I mean, especially when one adds the description economic storage. Maybe you could just say a word more about what your center is focusing on there, because
Sure.
this is a critical problem, obviously.
Absolutely, and there's really no one answer that solves all the problem. It really depends on what type of the end use you have and the amount of material. But you know, we've focused on high pressure containers. We've focused on chemical storage. We focused on material absorption and solid state storage. And again, every one of those have a cost per dollar per kilogram storage value. And depending on the application, it really is focused on what is it that you want to do at the end with the hydrogen. So for some government applications, solid state storage works very well, but they're not really economical when you're talking about large scale storage. High pressure storage works well, but obviously you have to be careful on how you handle and how you deal with those issues. The question is, if we can bring hydrogen as a direct energy carriers to customers, I think that has net benefits that really is interesting, and its applications are really critical in the future. So we're looking at some of the catalysis and some of the reactivities on how do we use these things better in a fuel cell applications. And again, it's not just us in the entire DOE complex that's doing that.
I gather, just in a word, I gather you're not looking at geological storage at the center.
We are not. No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Let's to move on to another arena. Clearly, well, Duke Energy. We have, of course, a private company. Savannah River, an innovation laboratory. One of the, as you mentioned, one of the perhaps 6 major focal points. But there's also, of course, the intersection then with the public sector, and certainly at the federal level, we see in the infrastructure bill funding for seeding for regional hubs. Any reflections on what you will be looking for, especially, frankly, Lynn, from the point of view of a private company, looking for from the federal and state governments in terms of enabling your building up of a hydrogen capacity?
And Secretary Moniz, I think this is probably one of the most important parts of the conversation, because I do believe it's going to take partnership. I'll use that term. Technology providers, research institutions like Savannah River, the universities, and then someone like Duke with operating expertise. We can describe for you what problem we're trying to solve. The industrials can in the same way. And it's bringing all of that expertise together with supportive public policy. You mentioned the investment in the hubs that's in the infrastructure bill. The reconciliation bill also has the concept of a clean PTC. That supportive public policy with the partnership, I believe, has the potential to accelerate development. It has the potential to get at the issues around technical feasibility that you were talking about, transporting, storage, blending, for me, how we move blended product through our infrastructure. Because ultimately, our goal is to get this resource to a point of cost competitiveness, so that when we are looking for those firm, dispatchable, carbon-free resources, we have something that's economic. And I believe we have the potential to get there with a strong partnership and public policy support. And that's what this opportunity represents for all of us.
And Vahid, just to narrow in as an example, do you see, in this case, let's say the state government in South Carolina pitching in, being supportive, how they might help advance this concept?
Yeah, absolutely. The state government has been always supportive of the industry's utilization of hydrogen and investment in that area. DOE just kicked off the Earth Shot for hydrogen with the goal of getting hydrogen down to $1 per kilogram in a decade. And it's that type of goal that really drives us to look at how do we integrate hydrogen more inclusively in our transportation sector, in our energy sector, as well as getting them critical components for research and development. So our goal, along with the Department of Energy, is to make affordable hydrogen, clean hydrogen available. And South Carolina has been making investment in this area. And with the concept of hub coming to Carolinas, I really do believe that South Carolina is going to be a huge supporter.
Yeah, you mentioned the dollar goal, a dollar per kilogram goal, and certainly getting the cost down, particularly for green hydrogen, are very important. But I do want to also just note that I think that's a dollar per kilogram of production. Right. But then comes all of these, to go, Lynn, to your word, operational questions about storing it, moving it, et cetera. So this is going to be it's going to be a big effort, and that's why I think getting these hubs going will give us the experience we need to do that. But let me again pivot. Clearly, hydrogen, as we've said, will contribute environmentally, particularly through being part of the decarbonization push. But we also know, and the administration has emphasized very strongly, the questions of environmental justice in frontline communities. How do you see the hydrogen hub development intersecting with that agenda?
Well, I can start, Mr. Secretary, because I believe this notion of community engagement is relevant to the clean energy transition, whether we're talking about hydrogen or whether we're talking about retirement of coal plants and introduction of solar, wind, storage, et cetera. It is essential to bring communities along. And President Biden has recognized that, not only with the concept of environmental justice, but just transitions for communities that may have been dependent on fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And so as we approach the clean energy transition at Duke, community engagement is front and center. It's a matter of listening. It's a matter of getting community feedback. It's a matter of involving the communities in a way that we're making investments in the right place, that we're lifting communities up. And the thing I like about hydrogen in particular is I believe there's an opportunity to repurpose workforce. So existing workforce, economic development can be a part of this. But I also think that existing infrastructure and minimizing risk of potential stranded investment could be a benefit as well, as you think about the infrastructure that not only we have in place, but industrial companies as well. So I believe there's a great opportunity here to bring this clean technology into our communities in a way that does it just right and actually minimizes some of the risks that I know we're all concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Wait.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's exactly the same line we are working with. We are working with the communities from two fronts. Number one, as you look at environmental justice, how has the current power plants impacted the regional communities around that? And then by converting that into a hydrogen economy, how would that impact them differently in a positive or a negative way? But more importantly, the whole fact that bringing hydrogen on board, it helps with the decarbonization process in general and lowers the impact of CO2 emission, has one of the most profound impact on disadvantaged communities. So I'm 100% on board with Lynn's explanations, and we're doing exactly the same thing.
And of course, both battery vehicles and hydrogen fueled vehicles really addresses the tailpipe questions, which are so important in so many frontline communities. Sure. We are unfortunately running out of time, but I have to put in one last question at least. And Lynn, you referred to it earlier. Duke has got a major presence in nuclear already. Savannah River has always been a nuclear focused laboratory. Maybe you could each comment on how you see nuclear integrating into this kind of a clean hydrogen hub.
Absolutely. And for Duke, nuclear is foundational to our ability to achieve carbon reduction, our ability to get to at least 50%, our ability to get to net zero, not only for the generation of power that it produces today and has the potential to produce over time, but as a low carbon source, it could also be meaningful to the production of hydrogen. And we sit in the Carolinas, 50% of the power today is from nuclear. And so you think about the strength of that resource and partnering with Savannah River and others to figure out how we can use it more broadly. I think the opportunity is great.
And of course, the only thing I got to push from the Department of Energy's perspective is that we got to work out a full solution to the nuclear fuel cycle, so that as we bring the full,
I'll agree with that.
as we bring more nuclear, which is absolutely essential for moving away from a carbon-based energy production, as we move toward more nuclear, we've got to be able to dispose those the used fuel elements and appropriately. So we just can't sit on them for indefinitely. We got to find the right fuel cycle. And I think this is, again, very close to my heart and a passion for the laboratory working on a fuel cycle.
And we're storing it safely today.
Yeah, absolutely.
This opportunity to move to a more sustainable solution for the long term.
Yeah, you certainly pushed my button when you say nuclear fuel cycle, and you've both referred in particular to the back end. I would just also note we got a lot of front end parts of the fuel cycle that we need to focus on as well. I'll just give one example, and that is that the department has focused on Generation 4 reactor development that requires a so-called high assay LEU, but we don't have any. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of fuel cycle issues that it would be great to see the Carolinas also engaged in moving that further.
Absolutely.
Well, look, we have in fact run up against the clock. So Lynn and Vahid, thank you so much for your perspectives. I think this is a great kickoff for this workshop, and I think shows the enthusiasm of our key institutions in the Carolinas for advancing this hydrogen hub concept. So I think we'll be seeing you again on the subjects. Thank you. And Alex, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and the panelists, Lynn, Vahid. That was terrific. I think we sound really aligned on the region's hydrogen capabilities and interests and resources. Now we're going to be shifting gears again, and we're going to turn it over to Neva Espinoza, who's the VP of Energy Supply and Low Carbon Resources at EPRI, which Lynn mentioned in the fireside chat discussion. And she's going to lead and kind of host a discussion on the existing kind of and emerging hydrogen hubs in the US and abroad to kind of really understand those recipes for success and how those things might be eventually replicated in an area like the Carolinas. So without further ado, Neva.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. And a huge thank you to Secretary Moniz, Lynn, and Vahid. I think that was just a perfect fireside chat to kick off our first panel and get us thinking about the vision of where we're going for hubs, hydrogen hubs, other technology hubs as we move forward, the value they bring in terms of economic development, the value they could potentially bring to our broader communities, and then thinking about how the Carolinas are so well suited potentially for these hubs in terms of expertise, in terms of knowledge, in terms of existing assets and existing infrastructures. So with that being said, we have a fantastic panel here. I think we do have some content and slides to bring up. So if I could ask our hosts to bring that up, that would be perfect. And first, I'd like to start just giving a little context around hydrogen hubs, or what I like to call net zero industrial clusters. So if you take us to our first slide here, I'm going to start with a quote that actually came out of a recent EPRI paper, and it talks about what will it take for a successful energy transition. And I hate when people read slides, but I'm going to read you this one sentence. A successful energy transition requires extensive cross-sector collaboration to harness innovation, prioritize investments, and advance new capabilities. So when we think about the conversation over the next hour or two here and think about the potential opportunity as we move forward, what will that actually take? And how have we developed our economy to date? So worldwide economy has really been developed around this century-old idea of hubs or clusters. Companies that are co-located for a variety of reasons. That could be for logistics, it could be for workforce, it can be for transportation, et cetera. There's a variety of reasons where our economies have been built up around this cluster approach. So if you think about how do we expand that approach to not only think about economic development, but think about communities, think about achieving our very aggressive net zero goals by mid-century, can we potentially use this cluster approach as we move forward? So if you take it to the next slide here, we look at, well, what enables a cluster like that? And the slide's a little meaty, there's a lot of content on it, but in the center of the cluster, you think about the applications or the technologies that could potentially enable a cluster approach. Today, the technology we're going to focus on is hydrogen. And how can we build a cluster that is potentially very well suited around hydrogen? But hydrogen won't be the solution alone. It's going to take a lot of different technologies touching it and working with it as we move forward. Now, if you think beyond the technology and the strategies and the community impacts you may see in these types of clusters, you think about efficiencies, circularities, overall cooperative ecosystems in different areas and collective synergies. And that all lies on top of 4 foundational pivotal pieces of which you heard a lot about in the fireside chat. And we're going to talk a lot about in our session and our panel here in just a moment. But the 4 key pieces that are absolutely foundational to building out these net zero clusters as we move forward. Of course, technology is a big piece of it, and we're gonna talk about technology, but it's going to take more than technology. Lynn talked really strongly about partnerships and how do we partner across the economy to achieve those goals? What are the policies that will be needed in order to enable that? And then, of course, the financial structures. What does the financing look like, and how does that all integrate together to achieve and build out these types of clusters moving forward? So that is exactly what we're going to talk about here with our 4 panelists today. We have a fantastic group with us, all of which are living this right now from around the world. So I'm going to start off, and what we'll do is each panelist has a couple of opening comments they're going to give us. So we'll go into that, and then we're going to open it for discussion and Q&A. So everybody here should have access to the question and answer box. Please feel free to type your questions as we go through each of our group's opening comments, and then I will facilitate and moderate a conversation here for the next half hour to hear more from each of our folks. So we're going to start with Randolph Wiederings. Randolph is a program manager of electrification and hydrogen at the Port of Rotterdam. Randolph.
So thank you very much for this this great opportunity to present here today in Carolina. And good morning to you. What you see on the slide is our hydrogen vision in the Port of Rotterdam. So in 2050, we believe what we've done is. So let me start with what we have done, how we came to our vision. We did an extensive research together with companies in the port, but also further on in Northwestern Europe, so especially in Germany. We did a research to see, okay, how can we decarbonize? What is the way forward? And we saw that hydrogen is a very important element in there. So we created a program for that, and this gives you the vision of it. So we came up with what we need in 2050 is 20 million tons. So for that, we can, in the Netherlands, we can produce roughly 10% of that can be produced locally based on offshore wind. That means that 90% of the hydrogen should come from somewhere else. And the simple reason for that is that we don't have enough space. So we have a program focusing on import. If you focus on today, and this is also what you see in the graph, today we already have a extensive hydrogen network and hydrogen system in the port, which is based on gray hydrogen, so based on steam reformers. And one of the first steps that we do is to decarbonize that by making use of CCS. So this is what you see in the graph as well. So the gray is turning into blue hydrogen towards 2030, and then it will become lower in towards 2050. On the same time, we start with the green hydrogen production in Rotterdam, so that we can produce in the end 10% of our vision. And we start with importing pilots for importing hydrogen on massive scale. So where I would like to end my introduction with is that the 20 million tons will reduce 200 million tons of CO2 emissions in Northwestern Europe. The Port of Rotterdam today is the energy port in the Netherlands, or in Northwestern Europe. And 30% of the total energy demand today comes in via the Port of Rotterdam, so the total energy demand for Europe. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Randolph. That was a fantastic introduction. And I'll definitely be interested to hear more about the transition you guys will be making from gray to blue to green hydrogen. I think that strategy and that bridge to get there is going to be fundamentally important as we see the progression of these technologies move forward. Okay, with that, let's move over to our next panelist. We have Joe Howe, who is the Executive Director of the Energy Institute of the University of Chester, which is associated with the HyNet Northwest project. Joe.
Oh, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much, Neva. Fabulous discussion, fabulous presentation so far. So I'm the academic lead on something called the HyNet Industrial Cluster, which is in the northwest of England. Fabulous slide. These are the key elements that we're concerned with within the northwest of England. It is the anchor project for industrial decarbonisation. During the course of the next 7 or 8 years, we will be in a position where we will be producing approximately 3.5 to 4 gigawatts of hydrogen. We will be capturing a lot of carbon from the industries in the local area. We will have a particular focus on blue hydrogen. We are linking in and working with a whole series of different industries. So we're a demand-led proposition, and we already have exemplars of where we fuel switched away from using methane over to hydrogen. We have fabulous infrastructure in place already, and indeed we have significant hydrogen storage capacity with with the largest salt cavern infrastructure in the area or within the UK per se. So we're looking to have that as well. We've brought together a whole series of different industries with consumers, as I've mentioned, but hydrogen producers, distribution operators, transport operators, innovators, skills providers. I'm probably one of the leading voices in the UK around supply chain capability and skills, all advocating this agenda, all putting forward the proposition that the northwest of England is the leading industrial cluster that can take advantage of the huge opportunity that hydrogen represents. Back to you.
Fantastic, Joe. And I love your message around the supply chain approach, because the supply chain approach, I also believe, is fundamental and super important as we move forward in this space. So we'll certainly dive a bit more into that. Okay, now third panelist here, Janice Lynn. So Janice is the president of the Green Hydrogen Coalition and one of the founders of HyDeal LA. So Janice.
Thanks, Neva. It's really an honor to be among such an amazing group of movers and shakers on hydrogen hubs around the world. The Green Hydrogen Coalition is an educational nonprofit that focuses on accelerating the green hydrogen economy. And one of our key initiatives is HyDeal North America, so named after a successful initiative that was launched a year earlier in Europe, HyDeal Ambition. Our first location for our platform, HyDeal North America, is Los Angeles. And the idea is that we can architect a green hydrogen hub around a targeted low delivered cost. Next slide. Our targeted low delivered cost was $1.50 per kilogram delivered. That's where we have a value proposition for multiple multi-sectoral applications. And our finding, key finding, headline finding is that Los Angeles indeed can achieve mass scale, low cost delivered green hydrogen at under $2 per kilogram delivered, and transport and storage infrastructure is key. That low price point, delivered price point, is achievable with 100% hydrogen pipelines and underground geologic storage and salt caverns, We think that's entirely achievable with off-the-shelf electrolytic pathways by 2030. The good news is we can get started today in the near term using electric infrastructure to move electrons and locally produce the green hydrogen. And in the midterm, we can achieve some rapid progress through pipeline injection. Key finding, and getting back to your framework, Neva, is that all of these infrastructure pathways require regulatory action starting today. So the policy piece is really, really key. On the next slide, I just want to show you our hub and how we define our hub. Basically, our hub spans a 4-state geographic regional area. The off-takers, multi-sectoral off-takers, are in this box on the far left, if you see on this chart. In Southern California, those off-takers are in the LA Basin, potentially Victorville and Bakersfield, and they're connected to abundant electrolytic renewable resources in the Southwest region and connected to salt dome formations. The most proven one is in central Utah, about 600 miles away, and with potential injection all along the way. And the location of the salt is a big driver in cost. Remember, I said the transport and storage is key. There is the potential for salt dome in Nevada, which is a little closer. And so the delivered cost ranges between $1.60 to $1.95 per kilogram delivered. And the last thing I'll share with you is in terms of cost. We estimate that this end-to-end system will cost about $27 billion. I know that sounds like a big number, but remember, our Southern California utilities already spend, it's about a quarter of what they're planning to spend over the same time period. That's what's shown on the left. And remember that this investment will be underpinned by significant private sector investment, driving jobs throughout the ecosystem, both upstream, midstream, and downstream for the various applications. And that's my opening about Hydel LA. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Janice. And, we have to start today. And I like to think that here in the Carolinas, that is exactly what we're doing in this 2-hour session, to be followed up with some additional conversations tomorrow. So thank you so much, Janice. And then our last panelist here we have is Cosma Penzacci. And Cosma is our Executive Vice President for Hydrogen at SNAM.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for hosting us today to present our view on hydrogen clusters. Basically, first of all, let me spend a couple of words on what SNAM is and what SNAM does. We are the largest infrastructure operator in the energy sector in Europe, and our gas infrastructure spans across France, Italy, Austria, Greece, and also interconnector with the UK. We also own part of the infrastructure in the Middle East through our stake in ADNOC. Our view on hydrogen clusters, and we can see that in the following slide, is based on the European Hydrogen Strategy, which was published last year. And is underpinned also by the work that has been carried out by 27 different European TSOs, transmission system operators, and that can be read in the European Hydrogen Backbone report that has been published just a few weeks ago. So basically, to have a cluster, we are looking at several elements that should be present at the same time. Of course, a strong set of off-takers, but also the possibility of creating hydrogen either in the same location or far away, but being shipped at low cost through existing pipelines at a competitive price. And on top of that, there must be also strong technological underpinning, which is typically allowed by the presence of universities. Here, we are just focusing on what SNAM, for example, is doing right now in Italy. And as you can see in the following last slide, the clusters that we have been supporting in Italy are clusters that amount to approximately 5 gigawatts of potential hydrogen consumption. It's important to state here that all the different clusters have can have different types of hydrogen as the relevant source of energy transition. For example, in the Po Valley, blue hydrogen will likely play a crucial role, as there is the opportunity to store CO2 in the Adriatic Sea, while of course in southern Italy there will be a massive production of green hydrogen that will also be shipped through our pipelines, potentially towards the northern part of Europe, and in particular Germany. One of the key things that hasn't been highlighted so far, I think, is also that working on clusters is fundamental to work on the last mile technology. So implementing hydrogen is not only about finding the perfect match between, renewables, electrolyzers, or other sources of low carbon hydrogen production and final users, but also to adapt technologies within final users, such as ceramic, glass, tile makers, steel makers, in order to make the process as efficient as possible, and in order not to change the product, which is the crucial element here, which sometimes is the final hurdle towards industrial adoption of hydrogen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cosmo. I think that was fantastic. And the key point that you said there that I think is really top of mind is what you said at the end, right? The product can't change, which means each of the clusters, no matter where they are around the world, they don't have a one size fits all approach or solution, right? It's going to have to be aligned to that cluster's resources, capabilities, industrial needs. Natural resources will be a very big piece of it as well. So great, fantastic points there. So let's start with a question. And Janice, maybe we'll start with you and then we'll open this one up to the group. But how do you even get started down this pathway, right? So we're sitting here talking about potentially setting up a hydrogen hub in the Carolinas. Where do we start? What do we do?
Yeah, and I agree with your statement a minute ago, Neva, that every region has its unique characteristics, right? Variety of factor inputs. But I think what we've learned in working on our cluster in LA, and some of the other speakers have mentioned this first, is you need to bring the ecosystem, right? It's not enough to work on production. It's not enough to work on the infrastructure. It's not enough to work on the multi-sectoral demand. You have to bring everyone forward together. And at the heart of it, if there's any community that's most important in this infrastructure as a starting point, it's a bankable off-taker. And in the case of Los Angeles, we're fortunate and we have a very motivated city. We have a very motivated local utility that has a commitment to 100% clean energy by 2035. So that's what's driving this. And the existence of a bankable off-taker, it's like the glue that brings everyone together. And once you have visibility into one significant one for the Carolinas, maybe that's Lynn's company, Duke. It's much easier to glom on others, because what we found in interviewing all these multi-sectoral demand off-takers is they have the desire to decarbonize. They have the goal to do that. But if you're a terminal operator, if you're a fleet operator, maybe you kind of understand where you can source the equipment to transition from a diesel or a gasoline equipment set over to a fuel. You know where that comes from. But the question of where do you get the mass scale decarbonized hydrogen, that's something they can't solve on their own. So that's the power of the platform, power of the hub, is bringing those off-takers together with the ecosystem partners that can realize a big, big vision.
Fantastic. Bankable off-taker. I'm going to steal that and use it and pawn it off as it's my own. But I think that's a great point there, Janice, that ecosystem. Randolph, how about you? What have you guys found in your creation of your hub? How do you start?
Yeah. Well, I agree completely with Janice. That's for sure. And what we saw was that the green hydrogen is much more expensive than gray hydrogen. And indeed, a customer wants to use it. So we investigated and we did the research together with the clients. is hydrogen the best option for you to decarbonize? Is it the cheapest one in the future, etc.? And if that's the case, and I think in many cases it is, what we also saw is that the customer wants to reduce the cost price as soon as possible. So what we did was we connected to the existing industry that is already there, because you need to develop the infrastructure, you need to develop the offtake, you need to develop the production basically on the same time. And the scale is different. So for example, in the Netherlands, if we start with, for example, buses on hydrogen, we start with one bus, but we want to scale up the hydrogen production, which is, it doesn't make any sense. So in Rotterdam, what we do is we start with building large-scale production, feed that into the existing infrastructure that there is, building also a new pipeline, but also in the existing infrastructure, and deliver that in the first phase to the refineries, because those are the companies that need it. They also need to decarbonize. They focus on green hydrogen as well. And when having that, the cost price of hydrogen goes down because we can directly scale up to production sizes of 200 megawatt. And on the same time, we start building the infrastructure for the trucks, so that the trucks can also start using this hydrogen, which becomes cheaper because of the already the growth of the production sites. So I think it's really about connecting with the current industry and making use of the existing assets that you have.
Great, fantastic, Randolph. Well, so Joe, that brings me to a question for you, because you talked about this connection and the supply chain approach, but we've also talked about the importance a little bit of policies and frameworks that enable this. So what have you seen that's worked well in your region or has potentially enabled your cluster moving forward?
I think the key issue that's worked very well in our area is the capacity arguments that we've come together as a collection of industry, working interchangeably with governments, with the communities and the local regulators on board, and then going to government to ask them for incentives and revenues to get some demonstration facilities, some demonstration plants up and running. That then secures the social license to operate these particular technologies. It begins to attract investor interest in this particular activity, and it also provides confidence to the industry players again that this is achievable. Clearly, Neva, you've already outlined potentially a vision for the Carolinas. Our vision from industry was a concern about the climate and ecological emergency and their commitments to net zero. End of. You're on mute.
Mute. We couldn't get through more than an hour of the session without somebody being on mute. So I will be the sacrificial one. So Cosmo, this is coming to you next. I totally forget what I was saying now, but a lot of what we heard is around infrastructure and the need for infrastructure. So, and we talk about blending and transitioning infrastructure. How do you see that from your company's perspective? And how do you see this potential hydrogen economy infrastructure playing out in the years to come?
Well, thanks for the question. We have published, as I probably mentioned before, this paper called the European Hydrogen Backbone that explains how the European infrastructure will be progressively converted to hydrogen usage from now until 2030, and then after 2030 up to 2050. And the vision that is emerging is basically a hydrogen infrastructure that is based on 70% on repurposing existing gas pipelines and 30% based on new pipelines being built from scratch. Now, there are two elements there that have to be taken into account. Element number one, as of today, some of the regulation in terms of what can be repurposed is still or needs still to be updated. And it's a work that is going on both at US level, North American level, I should say, and European level. There's a group, for example, of European TSOs working in an association called H2GAR, working exactly on this as we speak. And the key rule that is being discussed is, of course, the ASME rule that talks about how you can actually use pipelines. And then there's the second point, which is how can you reuse storage? So we have heard a lot about salt caverns, but one of the key points here is also, can you reuse depleted gas fields? And that's, for example, the work that we are doing and testing across Italy and France to see whether that is the case. Because if that's the case, then we have plenty of assets to be reused for high volume gas storage. And just to give an idea here about the costs of reusing pipelines versus building something from scratch, our calculations points towards a cost of transportation of hydrogen by reusing existing pipelines, which is in the order of $0.2 per kilo of hydrogen per 1,000 of kilometers. Which, if you imagine that 1 kilo of hydrogen, even in a competitive situation, is produced between 1.5 and up to $3 per kilo, represents a relevant but still not enormous share of the delivered cost. One final thing that I would highlight here is that, as also the other panelists have said, it's very, very important to have to find the proper regulatory support. And at the moment, one of the things that is hindering hydrogen support is having very different and patchy regulatory support. For example, in the Netherlands, there's definite regulatory support for using pipelines. It's not the case in the rest of Europe. In the UK, there's the most advanced scheme on blue hydrogen compared to the rest of Europe. So let's hope that at least the US get it right from the very start.
Well, fantastic, Cosmo. And actually, Janice, I'm happy you raised your hand, because I know you and I have had similar conversations to this before. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you, Janice, on that perspective of transport and storage. And of course, we can build on top of that some of the regulatory pieces, which I'd like to open both of those to the group at large. So Janice.
Yes, thank you. And Cosmo, I want to first of all applaud your company and the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative. It's been an amazing inspiration for us here in North America. And when we focused on our hub, what we found was that the lowest cost way of achieving low delivered cost for a targeted set of multi-sectoral users required pipeline, it required geologic storage. And the other key finding was in North America, we have a lot of regulatory ambiguity, especially if your pipeline needs to span multiple states. And so, and that's work I think that you were referring to, Cosmo, that Germany and Europe is much further along in clarifying that policy and regulatory landscape, namely who has jurisdiction over international, or in our case, interstate pipelines for the movement of hydrogen as a fuel. And when we start thinking about all these different use cases, our conclusion was in North America, FERC would be an appropriate jurisdiction. The Gas Act would be the appropriate legislation, but there's still enough ambiguity that it will inhibit investment. So that needs to be fixed. You can think of all the provisions that relate to the Gas Act as it relates to the natural gas system. We need those same sorts of provisions applied to hydrogen, both blended and 100% here in the United States.
Great, thank you, Janice. And certainly when we think about that here in the Carolinas, we're talking about a North, South Carolina at a minimum type of hub cluster infrastructure. So that state and federal piece of it will become more and more important. How about Randolph or Joe? Any additional perspectives or thoughts on the transport and storage pieces, specifically around regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. If I may come in there, Diva. Within the UK, we've been very much working on the pilot projects and working interchangeably with the Health and Safety Executive in the UK, taking the evidence from that to inform a set of hydrogen standards that are being looked at the moment to inform UK policy, so that can inform planning permission, it can inform the investor. We recognise and we're very cognizant of this. Within the UK, we have two different propositions on the table. One is around blending of gas into the distribution network, so the 20%, 80% blend, 20% hydrogen, 80% methane. And then the other one that's just emerging is a national grid perspective called Project Union, which is looking at 100% hydrogen around the country with a hydrogen ready network to be in place by 2030.
I had not heard of Project Union, so you're going to get Googled here in a second around 12:08 when I have to turn this panel over. That's, I see Janice kind of bopping her head too. Yeah, that sounds amazing, Joe. So Randolph, any other additional perspective from you before we shift to our next topic here?
Yeah, so in the Netherlands, Gasunie, which is the Dutch TSO for natural gas, they are working on repurposing the existing gas infrastructure for 100% hydrogen. So what they are doing right now is in the industrial hubs like the Port of Rotterdam, where we work together with Gasunie on developing the infrastructure throughout the port. The next phase for them, and I think it's 2027 where they're aiming for, is to connect the different industrial hubs via a national grid. So this is basically Gasunie who is now driving that. What I see in that discussion is that the difficulty there is that the end users that we are currently discussing the hydrogen with can use different sources of hydrogen, and those different sources also have different qualities of hydrogen. So we are now in the Netherlands, and especially in the project where we are in the Port of Rotterdam, we are now discussing, okay, what will be the quality of the hydrogen that needs to go through the pipeline? Will it be a lower quality? Will it be a higher quality? What kind of requirements do the customers have? And we see there a huge difference between on the user side, and difference between the uses for hydrogen as a fuel or as a mean for high temperature heat, or for feedstock. And basically on the same thing is what we currently see on the production side. So if you produce, and especially if it comes by ship, if you produce somewhere green hydrogen, how do you make sure that this client is getting the green hydrogen? So these are the types of questions that we currently have.
Great. Those are great questions, Randolph. And I'm going to take something you said and drive it into our next kind of area to talk about. So you talked about understanding the users and the requirements around that. And I think that brings us back to the conversation of the stakeholders and the partners as we think about building clusters and hubs. So, and there's some questions here in the chat, and I think this will start to tie to some of those, but you guys have all been really successful in pulling together these stakeholders and creating these relationships. So are there lessons learned or, emerging truths, if you will, of when you are looking to pull stakeholders together to create a hub or cluster? What have you learned? How do you do it? And as we think about doing that here in the Carolinas, what are the core things we should be thinking about? And anyone could jump in, or I'm happy to.
Oh, shall I take that then, Neva?
That'd be great, Jeff.
Yeah, certainly in the northwest of England, I led on the development of this industrial cluster around the Northwest Hydrogen Alliance, and that actually nests so well with the HyNet proposition. We brought together producers, consumers, innovators, distribution operators, all wanting to champion the opportunities around hydrogen in the northwest of England. We have gone to government to say there's a real demand here from industry to actually transition from methane to hydrogen, both in terms of innovation, but also in terms of consumption, and to really demonstrate to governments that there's a passion around the demand-led solution, that there is a demand there for hydrogen, and that there is a demand there for clean growth and to transition to net zero. On the back of that, we've been successful then in securing funding for these pilot projects, some of which I mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. How about alignment of stakeholders? Thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I can comment on that, how our High Deal LA process was managed, and we're far from finished. So we completed phase 1, and I shared with you the results of phase 1, which show that with off-the-shelf technologies, this is technically doable. And in phase 1, how we organized it, it was very similar to how High Deal Ambition was managed in Europe, where there were specific focus areas that our High Deal community, which included the entire ecosystem, the gas company, the off-takers, developers, engineering firms, OEMs, everybody in one mix, we had organized our work around specific focus areas. So we had an industrial plan and economics work stream that looked at the modeling, looked at the pathways. Within that, there was a focused effort looking at the gas pipeline system as one transport and storage pathway, and another pathway that looked at electric infrastructure. So there was a swim lane on that activity. We had another swim lane that just looked at contracts and deal structure. I say it was a commercialization initiative. And so we had not one, but 2 attorneys, 2 law firms involved in this effort. Again, heavily borrowing on the lessons learned from Europe, say like, who's going to own this? How is it going to be structured? Where can you put it? What are the in principle high level deal terms necessary that can underpin large scale investment? We also had a funding work stream that we brought together 2 investment banks, one from Europe, one here, to look at how, what are going to be the requirements of funders and how would you get this done? Where are the key risks? And finally, we had a stakeholder engagement work stream and a regulatory and policy work stream. So as progress was made along each one of these work streams, we could convene across the work streams to identify the issues. But importantly, it was in a platform where all participants could show up in a safe way, right? So some of these companies are competitors, some of them may bid to each other. There is no immediate RFP on the table. We were just coming together as a community, trying to make big change happen in an accelerated way. Some of the issues, especially around regulatory and contracting, we found were more effectively addressed rather than in a group of 80 people, maybe in a group of 4 to 6 people. So that would be my advice on that front.
As the world works, right? 80,
yeah.
40, you're able to move things much quicker. So you have to start with the 80 to get all the perspectives. Absolutely. So Cosmin, any initial or final thoughts on this topic?
Well, I totally agree with what Janice has just said. The only additional point here is that when you move from designing the scenario or the general approach to actually convincing the final clients, that's when the competition starts, right? And that's when the competition starts both at the international level across countries. So, for example, there's no secret that in Europe, like the resources that are being distributed by the European Union through, for example, IPCI, are going through an international competition for who wins those, right? And also when you have to win the clients within a certain hub, that's when you can actually have potential conflicts also among the different stakeholders. What we have found as a way to try and be successful, for example, with steel makers, glass makers, ceramic makers, also in the train sector, is to work a lot on the IP that is coming out from the first implementation and share the IP. So there's value in that, and you can actually increase the pie for everyone looking at that rather than focusing on how to share revenues from the very beginning.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're out of time. I hate to say it, but I so appreciate all the perspectives here today. And it makes me think of, I'm a little cheesy here, but we hear the idea of, think global, act local. And I feel like that's what we're getting exactly here today, right? The perspectives of these global clusters, how we get there, how we can drive global learnings from industrial clusters into very local impacts to see solutions in net zero. And I really do believe that this approach is an approach that will allow us to address very global decarbonization challenge in a way with global solutions that are applied locally. So thank you all for being here today. I'm sure the folks here in the Carolinas will be reaching out and wanting to learn more from you as we move forward, and hopefully be part of productive conversation. So with that, Alex, I think we will turn it back over to you. Again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neva, and all the panelists. That was really interesting. I wanted to jump into the conversation many times, but I held my tongue. I think what you guys highlighted is just hearing the common elements from across the different projects, and I've got some notes here, but really these sort of like an integrated focus. Not just thinking about one technology or one hydrogen production pathway, but how does that kind of ecosystem, I think, as Janice might have called it, and then this idea of as part of that ecosystem, the partnerships across the private sector, and then obviously public sector support just being really important. And we'll I think be talking about these issues as we continue. And so as we shift to the next discussion, I'm going to be welcoming Scott McWhorter, who's the chairman of the Southeast Hydrogen Alliance, to kind of drill down into the Carolinas region and have this discussion with some key hydrogen stakeholders to better understand kind of the existing local activities, better understand what they're seeing as the opportunities, and what we need to do next to build out this hydrogen ecosystem. And I'm Scott, turning it over to you.
All right, thank you, Alex. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, super. As Alex said, I'm the chairman of the Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance, and we're a coalition of stakeholders that have started coming together to take a look at how to transition the Southeast to more of a hydrogen market, and in that process, started to position ourselves for a hydrogen hub. So we definitely were taking, or I definitely was taking a lot of notes during that previous panel, and a lot of great input from just the international perspective and learning from that. And so hopefully we can build upon that in this section, because we've got some key stakeholders involved to kind of give their perspective on how hydrogen could evolve as part of the regionally economically advantageous decarbonization plan in the Carolinas, right? And so first off, I'll just introduce or allow our panelists to give a short introduction of themselves and the company. So first, Roger, we'll start with you. Roger Mortella, he's a Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at GE. So Roger.
Hi, Scott. Thank you very much. And just want to make sure you can hear me okay. I'm calling from a separate office. Okay, great. It's a very busy day in Washington, D.C. today, so I'm very thankful that you made the time for me to come and share some thoughts on this important topic. As Scott said, I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for GE, calling in from Washington, where there's a lot of things to discuss today with policy, with some big announcements coming out of the administration and getting ready ahead of COP26. One of my roles at GE is to make sure that we're being part of the solution. We have a 129-year-old legacy of innovating technology and to improve the quality of life for people all around the world. We take a lot of pride in the role we have to play in helping solve the climate change and the energy transition for the 170 countries where we operate. Hydrogen is a key part of that, and so I look forward to getting to some of the details today. Thanks for including me.
Super. Thanks, Roger, and look forward to getting more of your thoughts as that kind of the manufacturer in that supply chain of the energy production there and the involvement, how you guys see the transition for hydrogen in the Southeast. So,
Scott, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you unplug your headset and go back to your computer microphone?
Yeah, sure. Hang on one second.
That should do the trick. Thank you, Scott. Swati, would you like to jump in?
No, thank you. And hopefully Scott can join us pretty quickly. Thank you for the invitation to join you, Scott, Roger, and Brian today. My role at Duke Energy is I lead enterprise strategy and planning at Duke Energy. My team at Duke Energy is basically a strategy champion. We are driving transformation and positioning the company for the future. And the future is basically clean energy. Our mission at Duke Energy is aggressively accelerating our path to net zero through not only our planning, our commitments, but doing it alongside with our regulators, our customers, our community partners, as well as stakeholders. But in addition, we are also looking forward to, I think the panel earlier talked about this, the strategic partnerships and a disciplined approach to creating options that include hydrogen. And so I'm so pleased to be here today talking about hydrogen as an option for us to decarbonize. What an exciting and transformative time we find ourselves in energy industry. You know, you heard Lynn talk earlier with Secretary Moniz, and she shared her thoughts about hydrogen and the promise it holds. It is a versatile technology with many, many potential use cases, potential application. As our company, our customers and community continue to make progress on our respective climate goals. In our net zero analysis and in various forums, we have mentioned, and Lynn talked about it, that I think getting to some level of net zero by 2030 is doable. But as we look to mid to late 30s, to keep us on track and create options to net zero by 2050, or even sooner. Our aspirations are if we can do it sooner, we would. And so looking at these technologies such as hydrogen and enabling them is key critical to the company as well as our customer. We also have gas pipeline, as you are aware. So we also have a net zero methane goal, and we want to reach that by 2030. That's our goal for our natural gas distribution system. We are exploring how we can facilitate a long-term transition and a potential delivery of renewable natural gas, as well as hydrogen. So as you can see, we are pretty open to different options. But as Lynn talked about, hydrogen is a promising tool to reach net zero for energy industry when we think about we serve all the time. And so reliability, affordability, sustainability is super important to us. So what we have thought through is, as an energy provider, we see our important role Duke Energy plays in exploring opportunity across our businesses to decarbonize our fleet, for sure. You have to clean your house first. But we also feel like this partnership, this coalition, this hub concept partners us, and it creates hydrogen as a potential for many other members within our community. For us, it complements our solar, wind, battery technology as we are deploying it. As you have heard, we are fourth largest in solar deployment, and blending hydrogen into our natural gas pipeline system and complementing electrification of transportation sector as we partner with our community partners, our vendors, suppliers, to especially on heavy duty side, really bring hydrogen to bear as an option to even decarbonize the transportation sector in addition to ours. Here in Carolina, we are very uniquely positioned to advance this hydrogen use cases. We have high penetration of zero carbon resources such as solar. You heard Lynn talk about 50% nuclear fleet, as well as potentials for wind and other technologies to come in. When we think about hydrogen, these are complementary technologies that we think will enable hydrogen to coexist and really enable it to commercialization. We have existing natural gas infrastructure. So we have access to water. Carolina is uniquely positioned to connect transportation corridors. So as you can see, I can go on, and you've heard about it earlier. We have universities, we have research institutes. So it has all the making of a hub to really enable hydrogen economy. Thus, a Carolina as hydrogen hub is very exciting to us. It's very exciting to our customer, my industrial partners, my community partners, my universities. So we have the ecosystem to get there to our net zero goal, in addition to helping our community, vitality of our community and our customers.
No, thank you, Swati, and thanks for jumping in there during that delay. No, I think you outlined our thought process beautifully in terms of the way we see, from an alliance perspective, the way we see hydrogen kind of transitioning in the Southeast. But and we'll talk a little bit more, try to dig into those details as we go through the panel. Next up, we've got Brian Story, who's the director at the Toyota Research Institute. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So as you said, I'm from Toyota, specifically Toyota Research Institute. So my comments might have a little bit of an R&D bias. On my intro slide here, I just included some images as part of Toyota's interest in hydrogen. So in the upper left is the Mirai, our hydrogen fuel cell car. Just to make the point that the fuel cell really is a technology that's mature and ready at scale. In the upper right here is our fuel cell truck. So this is running port operations around Los Angeles. And so this image shows the important partnerships. Namely, the truck is built by Kenworth. We build the fuel cell powertrain, and the hydrogen itself is being supplied by Shell. On the lower left is our trucking fuel cell module, which is really based on the Mirai technology, which we're going to soon start producing these in the US at our factory in Kentucky. And in the bottom right is just a reminder that when it comes to heavy duty transport, it's a real major source of pollutants, and this is occurring in communities where people live and work. And so we also think that hydrogen has a lot of potential beyond decarbonization for improving quality of life. So that's all I have for an introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you to all the panelists for that great introduction, because I think you laid the groundwork here for what we're going to talk about today. And I think the audience starts to get the picture of, you know, what we have is distributed in central power production. We're talking about manufacturing, supply chain of all the different types of components and systems that could make up this transition to hydrogen in the Southeast. And if you look at, or the Carolinas in particular, if you look at the Carolinas now and you see the significant manufacturing, automotive and aerospace manufacturing that is occurring today. So how do we take that model and really build on that to really have hydrogen evolve in the same manner in the Southeast, while also looking at our main in-use applications today? As Swati was alluding to, we have significant port activity in ports in the Carolinas. We've got significant railway and transportation logistics. So we'll build on these concepts as we're through the panel, and just talk about how each of those and how each of these companies envision hydrogen as a part of those dynamics in decarbonizing the Carolinas. So why don't we just start with a general question for everyone? So and that's, how can hydrogen serve these decarbonization ambitions of the Carolinas? I think you've laid that out in a manner, but you know, we're different than very different than some of the other regions in the country, is that we don't have a lot of natural gas resources or petroleum, fossil fuel based resources in the Carolinas. But we do, as we've all talked about, have significant logistical operations and manufacturing operations in the Southeast. So can you guys just give your perspective on how hydrogen can really serve not only your customer base, but how you guys feel, your companies feel, that hydrogen can serve as that decarbonization pathway for the Carolinas? And Swati, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Scott. You know, as we talk about our path to net zero from a power generation perspective, we need technologies such as hydrogen that are firm, that are dispatchable. For example, it's an important challenge in Carolina to meet electricity demand on a cold winter morning or a cloudy winter day when solar resources are not available. So as our fleet transitions to more and more renewable resources such as solar and wind, we need a complementary and a technology that can serve the customer's need. I talked about we serve all the time. And storage currently is not there to transcend material time horizons. So we need technologies such as hydrogen. So the way we are thinking about it is, we have heavy infrastructure investments that we and our customers have made. So many existing gas turbines that we already have are capable. I think there was a question for Lynn that somebody asked about, are you looking at turbines? We can co-fire our turbines today at a 10, 20%, blending. But as we are working with our vendors, partners like Siemens, GEs, and others, we are focusing on expanding that to say, how can we expand that capability to get to 100% at some point? The second piece is, I think hydrogen costs more today, but we have seen steep cost declines if we all hold our hands together and we play our part. We have seen that in other technologies such as solar, which experience a 10-fold cost decline between 2009 and 2020, as we sit here today. So, experts project that as you think about green hydrogen, it's going to be very important that we create technologies that are affordable and cost competitive. And we feel like, partnership in getting the electrolyzer costs down, increasing electrolyzer efficiencies and capacity factor, and our low-cost renewable. As we get more and more scale on our renewable, perhaps curtailable renewable could be, key component too. So at Duke Energy, what we are trying to do is really look holistically at any and all options as we try to think about decarbonizing and meeting our goals of decarbonization. We are particularly excited about the federal bipartisan infrastructure legislation that awaits approval anytime now. I don't know when that is, but it should be now, any day. That bill provides that critical investment. Just like any other technology, it goes through a hype cycle, but it does need policy support. It needs funding support. And so this bill provides critical investment that will further enable the nation's clean energy transition, including R&D around hydrogen and creating these hydrogen hubs that will further unleash the capability of hydrogen while maintaining reliability and affordability for our customers and our communities. So that's how we are trying to think about how we can play our critical role in decarbonizing not only our footprint, but the community's footprint, the global footprint.
Thanks, Swati. Roger, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Thanks, Scott. And I'll try not to, I echo everything Swati said, but I think it's such an important question to ask, and I really appreciate you framing it this way. Hydrogen is just such a key part of our future. It really enables our opportunity to realize the goals of decarbonizing emissions while we're solving for reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy at the same time. We have to do both of those things together. We have to decarbonize and we have to make energy more accessible, more resilient at the same time. And that's where our technology and innovation is focused on, succeeding on accelerating decarbonization while making the grid more resilient. At GE, we see the hydrogen story from multiple lenses, a lot focused on the energy sector. And I appreciate kind of the industrial discussion that's coming up too, because we really need a holistic solution when we're talking about hydrogen. But we see it from the energy sector in a couple different lenses. We're engaged in renewable energy, gas power, and the grid. We want to focus on what's the best technology today to decarbonize while innovating the breakthrough technologies for tomorrow. So hydrogen is this key breakthrough technology. I really think the Carolinas really are well positioned to lead here. I think of the Carolinas as potentially the part of the proof point for hydrogen in two key ways. First is, and Swati already touched on some of this, and it was part of Brian's discussion too, and showing some of the cars. The Carolinas can help demonstrate that hydrogen can be used today to provide reliable energy. And as Swati has talked about, as Brian's alluded to, this is not a future concept. This is not something years down the road. Our turbines can use hydrogen today. We have over 100 turbines that have used hydrogen that have run for 8 million hours on some hydrogen mix from 5 to 95%. This is reality. This is today. And I think the Carolinas could really help reinforce with the energy mix they have there, the opportunity to use hydrogen as a proof point to reinforce that you have the capacity to generate reliable electricity, reliable energy with hydrogen. There's some pilot projects around the country, and it just seems the Carolinas seem so well positioned given their diverse mix of energy. I heard that they don't have, fossil fuels necessarily in the ground, but there's a very diverse mix of energy production in the Carolinas where hydrogen can play a part in being a proof point on how it can be reliable. So that's part one, and of being a test bed. I think part two for kind of being the proof point is how do you create the hydrogen infrastructure to actually generate and create the hydrogen. The most obvious option, there's lots of different options we can talk about. The most obvious is the green hydrogen part, renewable energy, hydro energy, nuclear infrastructure. Well, all of this is abundant in the Carolinas. Lots of opportunities to be the proof point for how you can generate hydrogen, and the concept of hydrogen hubs, which Swati talked upon. All the infrastructure seems to be there to not only focus on the energy sector, but bring in the industrial applications to help with the generation of hydrogen, to help with the use of hydrogen, and really be that proof point. So both on the showing that you can use hydrogen in a reliable way, being the proof point for generating hydrogen through a variety of different sources. I see the Carolinas and the hub concept as it seems like the Carolinas are a really great fit to be that proof point.
No, thank you, Brian. That's Roger. That's a great answer. So Brian, as a transportation focused company, and you guys are also working with a lot of the infrastructure builders and companies to work hand in hand in other states and other regions of the country. Can you talk about how you think the perspective from Toyota on how hydrogen could build out those decarbonization ambitions?
Yeah, I mean, with respect to decarbonization, I mean, there's many sectors we've already talked about that are very hard to decarbonize. So a lot of the attention for transportation is around the light duty vehicle. And it's pretty clear that the battery electric vehicle is going to have a lot of market there, right? It's a great solution in many places, but that makes up half of our transportation sector with respect to carbon. So what about the other half? Trucking, shipping, logistics, all this is a major source. And I think that's where the Carolinas have a real strength, as Roger was saying, to be kind of a test bed for many of these technologies. There's a lot of shipping that comes through the ports in Charleston and Savannah, a lot of logistics. So it's a great test bed for these difficult sectors like trucking, shipping, and the other half of the transportation. So,
thanks, Brian. So looks like we got a few questions in the chat or the Q&A that we'll go to. So, and first is about policy. I'd say. What policy instruments are you most excited about, and which can you encourage? Which can encourage hub formation the most? So Swati, why don't I throw that question to you, since you guys will probably be dealing with Duke Energy will probably be dealing most with a lot of policy and implementing a lot of the power generation technology. So can you give your perspective on policies, or even lessons learned from other states that you're operating in that are more progressive in implementing hydrogen?
Absolutely. From a policy perspective, we are a heavily regulated entity. So when you think about us, quite a bit of policies at the federal level as well as state level really, really impact how we do what we do. So opening up those policies to allow for a little bit of R&D viewpoint versus guaranteed, I think for a component, I think will be very important. And part of that is, tax structures and any incentives that can be put in place in addition to just funding. So I think when you think about any technology, as I mentioned, it needs to go through that cycle before it can gain commercialization and scale. That policy supported funding is key critical. And so we are working at all angles, trying to figure out how to decarbonize and push those policies. And policies are around hydrogen and also the ecosystem around hydrogen. You know, we are participating in many energy forums. We have a partnership with EPRI and Gas Institute that Lynn spoke about, which is looking at low carbon resource initiatives. So I think support from government and regulators to allow for us to test, to allow for us to recover, allow for us to think about these resources as mix as part of our ecosystem will be super important. And I think that for any technology, not just hydrogen, that is do or die. And so we are engaged at federal level, we are engaged at the state level. You know, we are working very closely with Secretary Moniz's Energy Futures Initiative to really impact those policies and those funding requirements that will enable hydrogen, not only for us, but for the economy as a whole to decarbonize, whether it be energy industry or transportation industry. And we are partnering. I mean, we are working with Toyota, we are working with GE, we are working with Siemens. So I think getting policies that not only help us what we did, but policies that helps our partners get to that scale and size is, I think, going to be very important.
Just a quick follow-up on this. This came out of the previous panel where, regulatory issues and interstate regulatory issues. Any comments on that? You guys are operating in multiple states now. Are there challenges for what we're thinking of doing across the hydrogen domain, and that you guys can relate from your previous work in terms of interstate regulatory challenges?
No, I mean, we operate a grid, which is super connected. So this is, in our mind, extension of that. And, utility industry has a strong history of being collaborative. You think about even in the past, I'll take you in the 60s and 70s, perhaps, of nuclear renaissance. When that was happening, that was no different challenge than how we are thinking about hydrogen. How do we make it affordable? How do you make it safe? How do you make it cost effective? What about spent fuel? So when we think about our learnings from how coalition of partners and peers that can come together to create solutions and option, and be that voice to our regulators in a collective manner, be that voice to our federal policymakers and lawmakers, I think is a strong way of coming. So we are taking our learnings from the technologies that we have deployed in the past. And I feel like hydrogen is no different, and utility as an industry along with our partners, when I think about GE Siemens, I mean, I think our relationships go so far, and then even Mitsubishi and so on and so forth. So I can, I'll forget the name if I try to list them all, but I don't want to do that. But that, the whole balance sheet of how to bring all that together has moved. But, us as an industry and us as Duke Energy, we have history of doing it. We know how to do it. And I think we have track record that we can make that happen.
No, that's great to hear from a utility, the voice of a utility and their perspective on hydrogen is as a primarily being in the R&D field for 20 years on hydrogen and now trying to build a coalition. That's something that we always worry about, is informing and regulatory issues just bringing us down. But it's great to hear that you guys have traversed these and are building on the lessons from the past. So there's a question in the Q&A about around renewables and the massive amount of renewables that will be required to produce all the hydrogen. So when we think about renewables, it's obviously PV and wind, and so Roger, can you talk about a little bit about how you think wind and even turbines for that matter could really facilitate that, both the demand and for hydrogen in the Carolinas?
Sure. And when we think of, how to create hydrogen and how it comes from renewables, I think I would start with the proposition in the near term, our goal should be two things. We want to grow renewables as quickly as feasible. And we want to look for as many pathways and avenues to create hydrogen too. I talked a little bit about the utilization of hydrogen, and there's really good work going on. We can utilize hydrogen today. I think the tougher question right now is how do we create it? And renewables is an obvious avenue to do so that we should be looking at. I mean, it's not obvious in that we've solved it, but it's an opportunity, as is nuclear, as are other technologies. And so I think we want to grow renewables. I think we all agree with that. And we want to be making sure that we have an open mind to all these different technologies, whether it's wind, solar. I think nuclear, which is part of EFI's white paper, I think has huge opportunities. And we can talk about blue hydrogen too with carbon capture and sequestration. The reason I think we want to be open-minded about this is I don't know that anyone's far along enough to know like which ones will play out best from a cost perspective, a feasibility perspective. And we also hope we get to the point where we're going to have excess renewable energy, or we might have excess nuclear energy. And so while some of the turbines are spinning to keep the lights on and electrify Brian's cars and things like that and charge them up, we might be having solar, or we might be having some excess nuclear that can be generating hydrogen at the same time. I mean, when I think of hydrogen, I think it's the ultimate energy storage, right? I mean, it is effectively energy storage. So we want to, I think, be very open-minded. We want to have all these options on the table. I think we should be researching all of them. I think the Carolinas have a role to play because you're so diverse with your energy mix. I get back to that point. You're in all of it, including hydro, another opportunity. And you have that opportunity. And to the question about policy, I just maybe end tying these two together. I really appreciate Swati's answer on policy, tying it to tax credits, tying it to cost. I think the biggest thing, on policy is always certainty. These are big breakthrough technologies. They're big bets. They're big investments. I think we are optimistic about where they're going to end up. But when you make these kinds of investments, you want the policy to signal clear support for them in terms of investments, in terms of committing to the technology. I said it's a busy day in DC. We had a big announcement this morning with the Build Back Better plan, and we're all looking forward to digging into those details, the hydrogen tax credit and things like that, because we want to see policies send that clear signal of support so that those of us who are making these investments, we have the certainty to know that we're going to have partners, we're going to have coalitions, the government's going to be there with us, sharing some of the risk and sharing some of the upside, so, as well as the permitting. And that would be the last thing I say on policy is the notion of the hub concept, which is terrific from a feasibility standpoint. We want to make sure the policies are addressing the uncertainty of permitting, addressing the uncertainty of various approvals and things like that, so we can address certainty, smooth it up, and make sure we have these opportunities in the Carolinas to grow the hydrogen infrastructure.
Thanks, Roger. So, and Swati, just while we're on that particular question, from a utility perspective, I don't really see it as there's a significant problem with scaling renewables. I think it's more of a balancing the grid for you guys today, because renewables are going to be so variable, right? So how do you see hydrogen playing a role in increasing the rate of adoption of renewables for the utility sector? Is that something that you guys have looked at?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about decarbonization, renewable, of course, is a part of that story. But we also know the intermittency of renewable is a challenge that we are trying to solve it with renewables, with battery, lithium-ion battery, and other technologies as well. But as we look at hydrogen, I'm super excited about hydrogen because of its versatility. I mean, it could be a direct fuel, it could be a supportive fuel, it could be a fuel to transportation, or it could be a fuel to electricity to electrify transportation. So that's just a few of the things that come to mind. So I think while we are leaning into renewable technologies, hydrogen does show that versatility and promise to coexist in a very meaningful way. And I think where hydrogen really, really transcends some of the things that renewable perhaps doesn't offer is this across time horizons of when I need it, where I need it. It can help us balance that renewable, spectrum, because as you mentioned it, we have to balance the grid. It's one grid, and we have to serve all the time, even if it's a cloudy day or if the wind is not blowing. So I think hydrogen shows that promise. And so the way we think about it is hydrogen plays a very, very effective role in the reliability component of it, in the efficiency component of it, and it'll help when it's and actually complement or optimize and enhance our hydros, our nuclears. So I talked about hydrogen technology cost. If you have curtailable renewable, and if I can use that to produce hydrogen, now suddenly my costs are down, and then now I can use hydrogen. And if I create hydrogen close to the source and use, I reduce transportation costs. So hydrogen's versatility and options are numerous. But as Roger said, it's still nascent, and we still need to test all of these things and figure out what complementary ecosystems work together to create hydrogen. It's just not technology, it's the cost component too that we have to continue to bring down and really make it complementary to renewable. But where I talked about the curtailable solar, you won't have much scale of curtailable solar till you have heavy penetration of renewable and wind and solar. So I think that scale of renewable, especially, we are very heavy when you look across the country, we have quite a bit of solar, and we are looking at wind as another advent too. When you look at that, complementing that with our hydro, with our nuclear fleet, Roger said it well, we have such diversity that hydrogen can even be optimized beyond your typical use cases, direct use cases, even the indirect use cases creates more of an upward trajectory in my mind. And Duke Energy is leveraging all of those thought process. The other thing my co-panelists are saying, we have to be open. We have to be open to ideas. We have to be open to solutions that perhaps didn't make sense before, or is not how we've done it for the last 100 years. But it may be the way we have to think about it to make these technologies work together.
Yeah, great perspective on that. Great to hear that again. So why don't we switch gears a little bit and talk about the supply chain, right? For all of this to happen, right? We don't have a significant supply chain for hydrogen. We've talked about fuel cells. We've talked about other areas that we've talked about production. We've talked about storage and delivery, right? So all of those are going to take a significant buildup of supply chain, right? And Brian, that's an area that all of our panelists today have a lot of experience in supply chain. But Brian, why don't you expand on a little bit of that, of lessons learned for Toyota in supply chain, and how that might, if we look at the automotive supply chain in the Carolinas, do you think that supply chain is a huge limiting factor in the growth of this of the hub concept and of just the overall hydrogen in the Carolinas today?
Well, I guess from the Toyota's perspective, obviously supply chain is a major issue, as everyone knows these days. For our fuel cell vehicles, we don't make enough yet for it to be a serious limiting or unique factor. That could change. We're ramping up production of our truck modules in the US and Kentucky. So in the future, if we make larger volumes, there might be some unique constraints. We certainly see a lot of constraints in the battery world. So if we think of analogies there, in the future, this could be kind of a major issue. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. And with respect to building out, things like fuel cell vehicles and for different applications, obviously the Carolinas and the Southeast, there's a lot of OEMs and suppliers there. So that strong presence, I think, is a huge advantage. All of us OEMs, we rely on others for expertise, right? We don't do it all. We rely on partnerships. Our trucks that we make in California are built in collaboration with Kenworth and others. So, we can't do it alone. I guess for, Carolina specific, obviously BMW has a long history and presence there. We've partnered with them on hydrogen before. They also have demonstration projects on logistics and trucking in Germany. So that's obviously a great strength for y'all.
Oh, thanks, Brian. So, and Roger, could you kind of expand on that from a manufacturer's perspective from wind and turbines and even just looking across, if we were going to enable the production of hydrogen in the Carolinas, what do you think the major supply chain issues are today?
You know, we focus, like as you said, on the energy side of it, both the utilization of hydrogen with the turbines. That supply chain is pretty well established. The renewable supply chain is growing, I would say, and more in its nascent stage. We have a strong onshore wind supply chain. I think there's huge potential, you know, in the Carolinas to up the onshore wind potential. That's one area where it's a little lighter, you know, than some other things. I think the question then becomes offshore wind. Does that present, you know, the untapped opportunity here to be part of the solution? And a couple of things we're seeing there. First of all, the Biden administration, which in the last couple of weeks have made some very positive policy pronouncements in terms of taking things to the next step of assessment for expanding offshore wind beyond the Northeast and into the place like the Carolinas. So that's something we'll be looking at very closely, working with for partnerships to create kind of that excitement around more offshore opportunities. The supply chain for offshore, it needs to be localized to some extent. Obviously, these are huge towers, huge blades. It's a very complicated thing. And you know, GE is a company with a 129-year manufacturing legacy in the U.S. We're really excited about the initiative and the focus on offshore supply chains in the U.S. And you know, we've been discussing plans. We've shared some ideas, and that would echo some of the experience we have with onshore supply chains as well as our offshore in other places in the world. So we see this untapped potential there for offshore to be part of the solution. There's questions to be you know, asked on the logistics side in terms of, you know, transportation, storage, the combination of industrial uses. And that's why, again, the notion of industrial hubs, that we're approaching this beyond just the energy sector, that we're bringing the energy and industrial sectors together to solve this together through the hubs concept. And we're thinking outside our individual boxes and working more holistically. I think that's really key to the success here. I think that's a chance for the Carolinas to be a differentiator because it has both that energy diversity and the industrial diversity. It has the infrastructure to do this. And there's also the environmental justice opportunities. I just want to flag that. There's communities here who are being impacted by climate change that can be part of the solution, that can benefit from the renewable energy. I think the Carolinas have an opportunity to show some success stories there as well as part of the supply chain.
No, thanks, Roger. And thanks for bringing up the DEI component of that, because I think that is something that we think often about in the Carolinas, and we definitely think hydrogen can be the production, delivery, and the utilization of hydrogen can significantly impact those communities. So Swati, you know, we're talking about supply chain, we're talking about other markets and things, but we really haven't touched on nuclear hydrogen. I think you mentioned it. Can you, you know, just give your thoughts? You know, we've got significant nuclear fleets in the Southeast, or in the Carolinas in particular. Can you give your thoughts on where purple hydrogen or nuclear hydrogen fits into this the Carolina market?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about nuclear, you know, it's also zero emission. And so in addition to solar, wind, offshore wind, as Roger mentioned, nuclear holds a lot of promise. And, you know, 50% of our fleet in Carolinas is nuclear. It's the most efficient way of managing nuclear is it runs all the time. And so how do you utilize nuclear? Just like we talked about curtailable solar, is there nuclear role that is strong in hydrogen production and bringing the cost of hydrogen down? I think that's going to be very, very important to looking at solutions of production. Hydrogen, even though it's 75% of the mass, it doesn't exist in its singular form. So it has to be converted. And today it's very expensive to convert. It takes 4 times more energy, if not 3 times. You know, technology has moved around, but it takes that much energy to produce the same energy. So it's more transitioning from where it's needed. And I think nuclear that runs all the time creates that huge opportunity to say, how do we do this? And we have experience doing this. Even today, we take nuclear that runs all the time, even at night when our load is low. We have pump hydro, one of the largest pump hydro in Carolinas. So we use that energy to pump water up and then release it when we need it. Hydrogen could be similar, application to looking at how we can efficiently use nuclear. Also, I think from a policy perspective, as you guys may have heard, in all over the United States, we are extending the life of our nuclear asset because they are so valuable. So having this huge fleet of nuclear assets in Carolinas creates a really huge opportunity in Carolina to create this hydrogen hub to really jumpstart this ecosystem that hydrogen holds promise to.
Thank you, Swati. And so we're approaching the end of the panel. So Brian, I might turn to you for the final thought. Are there any lessons learned from Toyota's operations in other regions that you could think of that could translate to a faster adoption of hydrogen fuel cell, long haul trucking, that logistics sector? We're talking about transitioning this to decarbonize by 2030 and even in complete decarbonization by 2050, but getting the cost down by 2030. But are we any thoughts on how we can translate that to the Carolinas from operations in other regions of the country?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it brief since we're at the end here, but for those not familiar, Toyota has long been participating in a demonstration project around the Port of LA, around trucking and shipping with many partner companies like Kenworth and Shell, and it's funded by public-private partnerships. So this has been going for 5 years. When it started, we didn't have a truck. And so over the past 5 years, have been through multiple versions. And so now our most recent fleet, there's 10 trucks that are co-built between Toyota and Kenworth. And so in the spirit of Kaizen or continuous improvement, one of the foundations at Toyota, we've learned a lot in improving those vehicles over the past several years. And so they're really at a state where, of course, there's still many challenges and a lot of work to do, but we're not starting from zero. So if we wanted to, think about doing similar type work in the Southeast, we're starting from a different place today than we would have 5 years ago. We have ready technology, we have ready partners. So we're in a much better place that if we could launch a larger fleet quickly, we could think about different applications, different operations than just long haul trucking. So I think, we're starting from a place with more ready technology, and I'm sure Roger and Swati would say the same thing about the production side than even 5 years ago. So I think that's the main thing I would say.
No, and I really appreciate that perspective, because I think there's a lot to be learned by some of the demonstration projects that have gone on recently. So I want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, and because I think we've had a great conversation about how hydrogen can really serve as this impetus to decarbonize the Carolinas. So thank you guys, and also want to thank the EFI team. I think this has been a great workshop today, and for allowing me to be a part of it. So Alex, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thank you, Scott, and all the panelists for talking through, I think, what are the potential next steps for hydrogen in the regions. And I think this idea of Carolinas as a hydrogen test bed that was brought up with the important kind of emphasis on how to get the production side right in the near term is especially interesting. I also want to thank all the panelists and moderators of today's discussion and the entire EFI team for this workshop on the potential for clean hydrogen in the Carolinas. I'll mention just a couple of points from each one of the panels that I thought was, that I've really taken away from today's discussion. I think the fireside chat with Secretary Moniz and Vahid and Lynn Good was a terrific kind of table setting for what are the capabilities, the resources, and the interests for clean hydrogen in this region. And just hearing from both Lynn and Vahid about the capabilities that those two, significant organizations could bring to bear on this important issue, I thought that was really interesting. On the first panel, I thought something, I keep going back to what was talked about, this idea for like the need for a supportive ecosystem to enable hydrogen hubs, and just the role of the need for the bankable off-takers, the integrated focus, that is having hydrogen projects that think about the supply, the midstream and the downstream, and then obviously the social license to operate being just like a key undergird for hydrogen hub development from the lessons learned from those active hub projects. And then this last panel, I just mentioned it a little bit, but I was really struck by this concept of how to leverage current models for success from some of these significant players in the region and more broadly from Toyota and GE and Duke, obviously, in the work Scott's doing, how to leverage those models for success and apply them to hydrogen. That makes a ton of sense, and it is an issue that kept coming back up, whether it was repurposing existing infrastructure or leveraging existing labor against hydrogen. And so really I think today did a great job meeting our objectives, how to understand what are the capabilities in the region, what kind of lessons learned might we take from existing hubs both in the United States and abroad, what are those recipes for success. And then how are the current activities, how might they be wielded together, work together, the important role of partnerships, how can it all come together to drive to kind of the next phase for hydrogen in the region. So hopefully you guys took as much away from today's discussion as I did, and really appreciate a continued dialogue on these issues and just around hydrogen and broader decarbonization. So with that, I hope that you guys all enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we'll talk soon.